Hello and welcome to the Fat Dad Fishing Show. My name is Rich Natoli, your regular host of this show. And tonight I am going to be joined in just a couple of minutes by Jim Hutchinson Jr., one of the most requested guests. He hasn't been on for a little over 2 years. And, I think it's important that we reach out to people that have the information and a perspective that people want to hear. And I just keep getting requests for Jim to come on. So I reached out to him. He's gracious enough to say, yes, I am free on this Monday, and we're scheduled. He's going to be on in just a moment. We're going to be talking about a couple of big topics. And I wanted to kind of get through striped bass season before talking about, well, we know that it's going to keep going on for much of the area, for most of our listeners and viewers for quite a long time through the summer. Never really shuts down. But we want to talk about striped bass populations. I want to get Jim's perspective on what the heck is going to happen. I keep hearing people, I get a lot of texts, a lot of emails. Are they going to shut it down? What are they going to do? I don't know. I have my own opinions. I want to hear Jim's. And the other thing is that we really want to talk about is the Windfarms and the impact that it has. We have all this recent news about they're going to be stopped. Now they're back. What's it doing to the environment? What's happening with Empire in New York? Who's selling out to who? What's going on? How does it affect all of us? And we're going way beyond the whales and the dolphin, which is what everybody likes to jump on right now. But I'm more focused on the fishing. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I think that's actually not the fishing necessarily, fishing, but the fish. Well, everything else that's in the water. It's more than just a couple of pilot whales out there. It's the entire ecosystem for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast that I think is quite frankly in jeopardy. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Before I bring Jim on in just a moment, I want to go through the sponsors. As you saw, if you're watching the live stream in the bumper video at the beginning, Great Bay Outfitters on Radio Road in Tuckerton. Head down there, check out that shop, go see Paul and the crew. They've got all the boats that you need. They sell more boats than nearly anyone in the region, and there's a good reason. And it's not just because they have quality boats that they're selling and great products in the store. It's because of the people. And if you're going to support a local shop, you may as well support a local shop that supports you and does everything that they can in order to make sure that your experience on the water is the best that it can be, and that is Great Bay Outfitters. The other sponsor is me as a real estate agent in southeastern Pennsylvania. Also have a network of agents that I work with every day in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, New York. I go up the coast, except for Maine. I still don't have anyone in Maine. But if you need any help with real estate buying or selling, reach out to me, Richard Natoli at kw.com, or you can send me a text or just give me a call. That's the way I normally do business. 267-270-1145. So with that all being said, thank you again for everyone coming in. Good to see the people in the chat. We do have Great Bay Outfitters, James Flynn, Carl Ward, Jack West, ADFD Angling, and there's more in there, but they're not chatting right now. So welcome everyone. And with that said, we're going to bring Jim on screen right now. Jim, welcome back to the stream. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. We were talking before and said, yeah, I'd love to come back on this show again. It's been a while. And then you reminded me it's been since the Bengals Rams Super Bowl. So
yes,
you said it's been since the Super Bowl. And I was like, yeah, when the Eagles won. And you said, no, when the Bengals lost. I was like, oh my God, that's a long time. So.
It has been a while. Yeah. And it's, one of the things that I get is feedback, and some people complain about this, but most people love it, is that we tend to have people come back a lot. So it's people talking fishing. It's not a lot of pontification and everything like that. And I try not to lean on people too much, but I was like, look, this whole, the wind farm thing blew up again this year. Was Trump going to cancel it? He did. And then he didn't. Empire Wind, is it going? Is it not? Orsted, what's the situation there? Are they really gone? Or are they still around? So I wanted to bring that up. I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to Jim and I'm going to ask you your thoughts on it. And then the second thing is, you always have an opinion on striped bass, and
dangerously so sometimes.
Yeah. And it doesn't match always with other people.
It never does.
Like,
no opinions. I'm sorry to cut you off. It's the same with wind, and it's the same with politics. There's an extreme left and an extreme right, right?
Right.
It's either with striped bass. There's a lot of them. I want to kill more, and there's not enough of them. We got to protect everyone, and nobody should kill any. And then there's the rest of us in the middle saying, "You guys hear yourselves?" There's somewhere in the
Right.
middle is the discussion. And that's where I try to sit. But sometimes when you sit in the middle, you tick off both sides. So
Yeah. And it seems like the loudest people are quite often in the extremes, and the rest of us just kind of sit there just saying, come on, let's just let's just figure out something that makes sense between adults. And I think that's a perspective that you tend to bring to things. You'll say something and say, but you have to remember, once you do this, this is the very next step. And you've
Right.
said that in the past. It's like, you're right that, it doesn't seem like a slippery slope, but maybe it's a little bit more than people are saying. So I want to jump into that, and I want to start off with the wind farms.
Sure.
Because those, man, talk about an up and down roller coaster. They're full speed ahead. They're drilling. They're doing all their tests, their sonic tests or whatever, their sonar tests.
Mhm.
This is happening in this short town. These are the protests. And then all of a sudden it's gone. It's canceled. Orsted's out. And then you hear, but they're not actually out. They're still in. And that was only this number of square miles. So where to your knowledge, does it stand just New Jersey right now? Let's just focus on New Jersey to start.
All right, let's focus on New Jersey. Orsted in New Jersey is out. Okay. And they were out. I remember Halloween 3 years ago, they finally buckled and they're out. Yeah. But it's not just Orsted, it's Atlantic Shores, it's British Petroleum, it's Equinor, it's Avangrid, it's Shell. That's the one thing is that a lot of the wind proponents who say, they would say I'd like to think that I'm trying to bring the middle into the equation and
Right.
both sides to try to spell everything out. But when you do that, and I am opposed to industrial offshore wind, but there are the wind proponents who would say, "Oh, you're just a fossil fuel guy. You're a shill for the oil companies." I'm like, well, Equinor is a natural gas company. Orsted's a natural gas company, and Shell and British Petroleum. Are you kidding me? These are double dipping groups. But to get to your question, at this point, between Orsted stepping away and all the problems that they had here in the state of New Jersey, the federal lease sites in New Jersey that were supposed to make landfall in New Jersey are all on hold, or they're like Orsted has gone away. But Orsted has a lease site that they're trying to spin off, I'm sure, on somebody else.
Right.
But all the lease sites, somebody mentioned something before, ADFD angling on comments. I'm looking at the comments, and he said,
Yep.
Windfarms sounds really nice. I'm like, I'm with you, man. It's not a wind farm. They're not windmills. They're industrial offshore wind sites. And these foreign entities are leasing these grounds offshore in federal waters from the federal government. They are already paying the federal government. But what they need to do in New Jersey, at the South Jersey and Central Jersey industrial offshore wind sites that were proposed, they need to run the cabling onshore in New Jersey.
Right.
The battle for years has now been rendered kind of on hold because the Trump administration, with a lot of support from my Congressman Chris Smith at the Central Jersey coast, and Congressman Jeff Van Drew in Atlantic and Cape May County, have effectively worked with the Trump administration to stop that.
Right.
Then, with the president's executive order to suspend all wind operations, that was anything that had not been shovel ready, right? Key term that everybody has used for years in government, shovel ready. So if the wind farms, the industrial offshore wind sites in New England had already begun to install the wind turbines, they were allowed to continue. But anything that had gone to the point where it hadn't been in the ground yet, that was suspended. That includes the Empire Wind 1 site. That's a New York project. Federal waters, 16 miles south of Long Beach, New York, but it just so happens to be 19 miles east of Long Branch. Those are federal waters, though. That cabling was supposed to go into Brooklyn. The president issues his executive order. The Empire Wind site is going on. Then the Department of Interior, Doug Burgum, says, no, it's paused. And then it's paused. And everybody was celebrating. And that's the commercial and recreational fishermen in Long Island, and also the commercial and recreational fishermen in North Jersey, who are going to be impacted by this thing that's really just outside the shipping lanes coming into the Hudson. But it only took about 3 weeks before the administration lifted that pause. And now the work is ostensibly underway. There's this giant ship called the Thialf, Thialf. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a Panamanian flagged vessel.
That's the Death Star.
That's what we refer to as the Death Star. It's enormous.
Yep. Yeah.
So that is the one that's coming in. That is already set up on those grounds, and that work is continuing. And people ask, but I know you thought, but Empire Wind was farther along than any of the New Jersey wind sites. So Empire Wind was this close to actually having the shovel in the ground. It was suspended. So why did the Trump administration back out? I think there's some horse trading that went on. Basically, Governor Hochul in New York didn't want anything to do with natural gas.
Right. But
if you think about it, Equinor is not just a wind developer. They're also in the natural gas business. So I got to think that the lobbyists were down in Washington and said, what if we do this? I think if you were to ask somebody at Equinor, they would probably tell you that industrial offshore wind is not profitable.
Right.
But they are so close and they've had so many subsidies that they'd like to continue with this project. But if it would make Hochul happy to allow this industrial offshore wind project, then they need their gas pipeline. So now this natural gas pipeline is ostensibly coming through into New York. So that's the horse trading that goes on here.
Right. Right. Well, I don't know a lot about it, but I would think that at least there is a positive on having that natural gas pipeline going in, right?
I don't see things in positives that way. My job, I have two masters. I have to put anglers and businesses together. I have anglers, recreational fishermen who ostensibly pay my salary because we need to do at the Fisherman Magazine, present the latest information. And I have advertisers, tackle shops for hire captains, manufacturers who want to be introduced to the angler, right? So I have to make sure that both of these interests are balanced. That's my biggest consideration. So It's all about the fish, the fishermen, and the fishing industry. So I do care about the fish because I need to have plenty of fish there too.
Right.
But if you're talking to me on this podcast, all I care about is fishing. So I can't look at natural gas and say, well, I like that, or I can't look at anything else except fishing. And industrial, and all the studies that I have looked at, industrial offshore wind will impact us in a very negative way on a multitude of reasons. So I can't.
Well, and that's my biggest concern is all of the research that I have read, and I did go through a lot. It was before last year, but all the preliminary research, everything from the Navy, and I can use an example of fluke, like a fluke migration. They don't want to cross those lines when they're coming in.
Maybe
like they are repelled by those cables that are along the bottom of the water column. I mean, that's what is that going to do to not only the fishing, but the species itself that now has migration paths that are now uncomfortable for miles around these cables that are coming. And there's going to be, I believe there were supposed to be three or two large cables.
Let's put it this way. Forget one or two, because there are a multitude of projects. We're basically looking at 10,000 miles or more of undersea cables. If all the wind sites of all the industrial offshore wind farms were to made operational, making landfall, somebody mentioned Maryland and Delaware and New York and New Jersey, we're talking tens of thousands of miles.
Yeah.
I believe, based on the research, when I was first presented with this back in 2018, I felt that it was my duty to look up research to figure this out. And I started going through volumes of scientific research papers from Denmark until I started uncovering the fact that and NOAA knows this, NOAA Fisheries knows it, and so does the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management in the Interior Department. The Denmark studies have shown that flounder species are one of the few species that show avoidance characteristics around the heavily charged cables. And they noted that the catches decreased around the heavily charged cables at the turbines in Denmark. So electromagnetic fields, EMF, does have an impact on that particular species. And when I brought this to the table, I said, look what I found. Look, it's in this document. Right? Look at this. What about this? It's like, well, you don't have to worry about that. I was like, well, why don't I have to worry about it? And it's like summer flounder is the straw that stirs the drink here at the Jersey Shore. It's the most important species we have.
Right.
And NOAA Fisheries has acknowledged that they don't know enough about EMF. And they said if EMF has any impact on fish migrations, it will have a negative socioeconomic impact on the recreational fishing community. They have said that. So if you look at the Denmark studies, it's very clear. No one knows about it. The government knows about it, but they are just saying, well, yeah, we recognize it, but we don't have enough American studies. So basically it's the old, forgive the politics. We have to pass this bill to see what's in it. We have to build these industrial offshore wind sites to see how dangerous they'll become. And I can't support that.
No. And how could you? I mean, if you care anything about the species, you're literally going to cut off the migration and all the patterns of the summer flounder in the area where they are in their peak population.
Well, look, I'm going to put it another way. I could actually look at this now and say the Empire Wind 1 site is going to be beneficial to New Jersey.
Sure.
Right? Because if those cables along the south shore of Long Island into New York and into Raritan Bay, into parts of Raritan Bay, not the south side of Raritan Bay, not the New Jersey side, not Sandy Hook, not Belmar and Shark River, but if that does impede migration, maybe it'll push fluke farther to the south into New Jersey. So if I was really a jerk, I would say, go ahead and build it because we're going to get more of those fluke.
Well, right. But you would also be ignoring the fact that you're disrupting their natural pattern, which means we're going to lose a lot of fluke. I mean, they're just not going to live.
We don't know what's going to happen. The government doesn't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, right. And you think, can Absecon Inlet support the number of fluke that wouldn't make it all the way up north and are now turning in there? I mean, do we have the food sources?
It's ridiculous that we're moving forward with this. I'll tell you another one. This one was very funny. I've sat in, I started going through the documents. I started going through meetings. I started getting trashed, started getting in arguments and debates. It's fine. It's part of what it is, part and parcel of the business. But I was sitting in on one conference call about 2 years ago, and there were wind proponents and there was scientists. NOAA Fisheries was in on this. And when I showed up at the meeting, it was an online meeting. It was sort of like I can see the eyes roll and they're like, oh, who let this guy in? But, I was there. And then one of the wind fans starts talking about, listen, I want you to think about these turbines and how it's going to attract black sea bass. And the fishing is going to be great around there. And everybody in the room, even NOAA Fisheries, said it's going to be great. There's going to be a lot of black sea bass. They're going to aggregate around those turbines. Then the skunk in the room speaks up. I said, let me ask a question. I said, right now we have a 200% biomass of black sea bass, meaning that we were supposed to rebuild to 100%. We rebuilt to 200%, but they're not giving us any more access. There's no more access because the technical committee and the Magnuson-Stevenson Act will not allow us to fish more days on what we have. So I asked the question, and I asked of NOAA. I said, if you put 50 turbines off the Jersey Shore and black sea bass aggregate around there, and now you don't need electronics to figure out where the reef sites are, and all the boats go directly to the turbines, and in the morning you catch all the jumbo sea bass in the morning. Every morning you're going out and you're catching right on the turbines because you can use your spot lock or whatever. You can drift through it. You can catch sea bass. And then the folks in the afternoon after the jumbos have been taken out, they're going to catch and release all these, fish that aren't of size.
Right.
I was like, if you're telling me that the turbines are going to make fishing more productive and we're going to catch fish faster and more effectively, I said directly to NOAA Fisheries, how then are you going to give us more quota and open up more seasons? Because if we're more effective and catch fish faster, we're going to go over our quota faster. So we're going to need more quota next year. How are you going to accommodate that? The room went silent. Nobody said anything for 5, 6, 7 seconds. And I said, hello?
Yeah, there's no answer for that.
No, NOAA Fisheries said, well, we're not exactly sure yet. And I realized that they're selling a phony bill of goods, not NOAA, but the wind folks, because they're telling
Right.
you that the fishing for sea bass, especially, is going to be good. But what they're not telling you is we're actually going to, based on the way the system is set up right now, it's a system that's designed to fail because we're going to catch so many fish that the following season we're going to have fewer days to fish.
Right.
And then the next season we're going to catch more fish in fewer days till the point of, it's a threshold that just ends. At some point they just have to shut it down.
Right.
And nobody's asking these questions.
No, and I think that's why it was silent, because nobody ever thought about that.
Well, off the record, no, I got to tell you another part. This was a Zoom meeting, and I didn't realize, the whole COVID thing. It was after COVID, but the Zooms were still working. And then somebody said, we're going to go into breakout sessions. And I didn't know what a breakout session was, but they spin a wheel and everybody gets sent into a breakout room. So I landed in this room where I looked at the people in the room. I was like, they're all NOAA fisheries people. And then they see me arrive and I hit the camera button. I was like, I guess you guys probably don't want to see me here, do you? They all start laughing. And then one of the lead scientists we start talking. I was like, I'm serious, man. I was like, you guys will not give us any more days of black sea bass fishing now. I was like, when we overfish our limit with turbines, what are you going to do? And he asks another NOAA person, he goes, is anybody recording this? I was like, no, the breakout sessions aren't recording this. He goes, Jim, I'll be honest with you. We're running this ship before it's built.
Yeah.
I was like, I've heard this said before. Why don't you guys go public with this? And he asked again, is this being recorded? Nobody's recording this. I don't know what to say, Jim. You're absolutely right, but I have no idea what to say. Because NOAA Fisheries is in the Commerce Department, but they're not in charge of wind. The Interior Department is. They're the ones that are collecting a lot of money in leases. And that gets back to another thing with Empire. The Equinor folks are paying the federal government a lot of money to lease these sites. So it's all about money.
That's crazy. We got to get a Doge on this.
What's Doge going to do? If Doge looks into things, what Doge was looking at is where's money being wasted.
Right.
But if Doge looks into money that's coming into the federal government in leases, Doge isn't going to get rid of that. That's money that's coming into the federal government. I'm not trashing the president, but that's just money is coming into the federal government. That's what Doge was looking at, efficiency. And if you've got money coming in, you're not going to turn that spigot off. You're only going to turn the spigot off if it's running out.
There's a I don't remember the name of the book. I'm actually reading it right now. I don't remember it. It's on leadership by Simon Sinek. And the entire point of the book is there are people that are in leadership roles that look at it as everything as a transaction and by numbers. And they don't consider the welfare of the people, or in this case, the ecosystem that we're talking about. They're just looking at the numbers. And as I was listening to it as I was driving between appointments today, and the chapter that it was on, I was thinking, oh my God, this is very similar to what's happening right now. We have people in leadership positions that are not leaders. They're not leading. They're just managing laws. They're just managing rules. Whereas the true leadership comes from people that look at the rules and say, you know what, this is the rule. It's there for a good reason, but this is not the time from when this rule was placed. So they look for things outside of that. We have too many people, in my opinion, in government, both parties, that just want to stick to what they've done forever. And they don't want to change the things up, and they don't want to look at things differently. And the result of it is we're going to end up with look, I don't even know what it's going to do, if anything, to the striped bass, but that's a huge concern. Think about weak fish. You have something that's on the cusp, and what's it going to do that? So they're going to wait and see. And then if it's devastated, we're going to be back to 15 years ago on weak fish. We could be back. I mean, striped bass, the way that they're trending, as far as the research, whether people believe the numbers or not, if you just look at the numbers ain't good, and they're getting worse, or they seem to be not improving, at least. And if that is true, they're just playing with fire right now. And they just don't seem to care. I mean, just because it's easier to collect these dollars from the foreign company. Well, you know what I mean?
That striped bass is going to be an issue with these industrial offshore wind sites as well, because if the argument is that they're going to be great fish attracting devices that are outside of the federal line, and if you have more bait available offshore, Does that mean more stripers are going to be offshore because there's a
Yeah.
lot of bait offshore? I think that's the biggest impact in Atlantic and Cape May County during the November run. It used to be when I started at the Fisherman Magazine in 2002. For those years, if you had asked me where to go catch striped bass, jumbo striped bass, where in the state would I catch the biggest striped bass in the fall?
Rips.
Yeah, of course. I would send you the Cape May Rips, or I'd send you out of Fortescue, go chunking tussies or any of those shoals and
Yep.
lumps. So what has happened in that time is we had bunker protections put in place in New Jersey in 2000, and the bunker population went up. Now, over 20 years, the bunker population goes up. Simultaneously, the striped bass population in Delaware Bay goes down. So it's an X. There's a cross somewhere. There's a crossover in the
Right.
X. One goes down, one goes up. Because what I think is happening now, and it's a great thing that we have a lot of bunker. But why were the striped bass migrating down the beaches in November in the 90s and rooting around in Delaware Bay because they were looking for food? And if you have acres of bunker along the beach, they're not going inside Delaware Bay to root around. So
Right.
we have a lot of bunker, and they're feasting outside of Raritan Bay in October and in November. And then something triggers these fish to move. And once they move down the beach, they're not coming inshore. They hit Barnegat Light. They head due south, and it keeps them off the beaches outside the Sea Isle lumps. They're not coming in, but they're there.
Right.
So I think our spawning stock biomass at this point is still good. You want to switch to striped bass? Let's switch to striped bass.
Yeah, I think we can bounce back and forth. But that's something that I think we've been saying on this show for a while is, yeah, you're not seeing as many numbers, but maybe you can answer this. Are they even studying where these fish are now? I mean, are they looking offshore? Because
let's
people
put
are
it this
catching
way.
them in the canyons.
So they are catching them in the canyons. They're catching them far offshore. Our Northeast striped bass study satellite research shows these stripers are spending an inordinate amount of time well beyond the 3-mile line. But if you look at the spawning stock biomass, where it is right now, it's going back to the extremists that we talked about before.
Mhm.
And the folks that are ringing the doomsday scenario bell on striped bass are saying it's collapsing. Look at the spawning stock biomass. I'm 58 years old. I look at the spawning stock biomass and I say, we are exactly, according to the government numbers, we are exactly right now on this very day where we were in 1995 when striped bass was rebuilt and considered a success story. So we're not at that way big number in the early 2000s. That's a number I don't know if we can ever hit again. But we are on track to rebuild to that number. But where we are right now, statistically, according to NOAA Fisheries and the ASMFC, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, we are right where we were in 1995. And in 1995, that's where we celebrated the successful rebuild of striped bass. So it's a matter of perspective. I didn't start fishing for striped bass. I grew up at the Jersey Shore. I grew up on Long Beach Island. I didn't start fishing for stripers until 1990. And that population was lower than what it is today. But we were seeing a rebirth of stripers. So there's a little bit of twisted logic here. Our spawning stock biomass is still pretty good and it's rebuilding. Our problem, and this goes to the other extreme, is we do have a problem, if you believe the science, and I do, coming out of Maryland and Virginia and New Jersey and New York, that we're not getting enough baby stripers. That's going to be a problem that's going to bite us in the butt 4 or 5 years down the road, because you don't see it now. But I think these researchers in the States have done a pretty good job of figuring out where the baby stripers are every year, and we don't have enough of them. So the next few years, next 5 years, it is going to be tougher. We're going to see a lot. We're going to see fewer smaller fish, and that's going to be troubling.
So do you think that this is just a normal cyclical thing, or do you think there might be?
I think there's a problem. The Chesapeake is where the majority of our striped bass population are born and bred. That's where they come from. And we do have a warming trend. The waters are warmer. There's something going on in the Chesapeake that ideally I wish the government could spend some money on figuring out. Is Is it because there's a lot of variables. People always say, well, that's where Omega is. That's where the industrial Menhaden folks are out of Reedville, Virginia, and they're taking all the bunker out of the Chesapeake. Possible. There's too much nutrient and fertilizer runoff up there. That's possible.
Yeah.
Some rocket scientists introduced blue catfish into the Chesapeake in the 70s or 80s, thinking, oh, it's just going to be great. Well, they're prolific and they're eating a lot of fry. That's a problem.
Yeah, they are.
Chuck Manny's a friend of mine. He's a really good striper fisherman out of Highlands, New Jersey. And he and I were speaking earlier this year. And here we are right now as we're doing this. It's June 9th. And I remember 20 years ago when the bunker busting was at its apex. And we had a bunker busting striper fishery, central North Jersey, into the 4th of July weekend. Now our migratory run is kind of over at this point. Now it goes back to Chuck, and it was sometime in April, early May maybe. No, I think it was late April. And he said he was gauging the arrival of the Chesapeake run of big stripers based on some commercial guys he knew down in Cape Charles. He said, when those guys catch those jumbos that are coming out of the Chesapeake, we've got about 3 weeks before those stripers arrive. We had those stripers arrive in May, hot and heavy, and now it's over. So I think the stripers, this is just Chuck and I sitting around over a cup of coffee on the back of his boat talking about this, saying the stripers spawned earlier than normal on the Chesapeake. What does that mean for the fry? What does it mean for the baby fish? We don't know. Did they spawn early in good conditions or did they spawn in bad conditions? See, the biggest thought here, the extremists who will ring the bell on the striper population say, we've got to stop striper fishing because that's going to bring stripers back. We have no control over what constitutes a good spawn because we could put as many eggs in the ecosystem as possible, but if the conditions aren't right, the water's too warm, the water's too cold, there's not enough fresh water, there's too much fresh water. Whatever it is, we can't control that. And it's arrogant to think that we as human beings can force stripers to produce more babies.
Right. Well,
So,
that's what humans think, right? I mean,
we
you
do.
think about the weak fish, and everybody was arguing about was it commercial or is it wreck? And it turns out one of the theories is that it was actually the spiny dogfish was one of the big, and the resurgence of marine mammals.
That's exactly that. Well, that's my thought. I think it's the marine mammals. Because when you have when you're on a pod of spikes off the Jersey Shore in the fall, and all of a sudden you're also surrounded by dolphins. That's candy. They're just going through those schools and they're eating a lot of them.
So I'll tell you a story. This is all anecdotal, but it's 100% true. I've talked about it in the past. Out kayak fishing behind Avalon 2 years ago, and we launched and we go back, and it is, Jim, it was stacked with weak fish. I mean, the fish finders lit up on every kayak. We're just pulling them in every drop. We're trying to get through them for fluke, and we can't. And the one guy I'm with turns around and he goes, something like, here comes the cavalry. And we're turning around. I'm expecting boats coming flying up. It was porpoise. It was dolphins, whatever they're called. They were, I mean, pods. It was like the army was coming, and all of a sudden they're ripping around us. There's just scales all through the water. In about 25 minutes, we couldn't buy a bite. I mean, maybe they scared most of them away, but with the number of scales just glittering in the water as you went by, I mean, they absolutely destroyed it. And there must have been 50 plus back there. And in fact, actually, I'll tell you exactly where it was. It was Patty's Hole behind Avalon. So all through that deep area, they destroyed it in like 25 minutes, half an hour max. And then they just turned around and went right back out to Townsend, and no more weak fish. It took a while for the bite to turn on for the fluke, but we were able to get to the fluke after that.
They say that, and I say they, this was Russ Allen, who's a former head biologist of the state of New Jersey, who I knew him very well. But I think we're going back to 2010, 2012, whenever the limits on weak fish really got ratcheted down. I don't remember what the year was, but Russ said it's a mortality problem. It's a natural mortality problem. It's a predation problem. You mentioned spiny dogfish. You know, we had our commercial fleet catching and selling spiny dogfish overseas to the United Kingdom for fish and chips for years. Nobody even thought about it. Nobody knew anything about it. And lo and behold, some environmentalist comes through in 2009, 2010, and shuts down the spiny dogfish because you got to save these sharks. Shuts down the commercial fishery in the United States, especially in New Jersey. And by the time we have a reasonable limit back for these guys, the UK says, well, we already found another source for our fish and chips. So I saw a really funny headline. I think I wrote about it in the Fisherman a few months ago. In the United Kingdom, we're still sending some spiny dogfish from the Western Atlantic over there. But one of the newspapers in England did a feature story, and they studied all the they took samples of the fish and chips of the fish, right?
Yeah,
and they found that the London restaurants were using the endangered spiny dogfish, and it created a whole big problem. And I was like, you idiots. So they have defined that spiny dogfish is an endangered species in the Eastern Atlantic, just as we got our Western Atlantic fishery back again, shipping the spiny dogfish over there. But now it's become a problem in the United Kingdom because they're like, you can't use endangered spiny dogfish. They're not endangered over here.
Yeah. So talk to any tog fisherman.
Last year was I have now caught them on plugs, on top waters, on SP minnows, and I've caught them on tsunami sand eel imitations. Last fall in the pocket at Manasquan was the first time I ever saw a spiny dogfish blitz, where we had a good time with some stripers. There were only a few of us fishing, and it was like we had them on swim shads and we had them on sand eel imitations. But we saw water breaking. And everybody starts running towards it. And I was like, I've caught enough fish. I'm going to watch. And then it starts happening. And there's a fish boil. They were spiny dogfish because every cast guys were catching spiny dogfish. I was like,
I've never seen that.
I've never seen that.
I've seen Fluke doing that. I've never seen a dogfish.
This was my first. If you haven't fished in the Monmouth County area in the fall, in November, anywhere from the pocket in Manasquan up through Belmar all the way to Sandy Hook, you got to make some time to do that come November. It's an incredible fishery. And it's pretty friendly, believe it or not, as long as you're cordial with people. But there's the striper fishery is just completely bonkers. You see things you've never seen before, like a spiny dogfish blitz. And the weekend of Thanksgiving, I bumped into a father and son. It was that Sunday. They were from Pennsylvania. They were wearing Philly hats, and that's why we had a lot to talk about. But that morning we came off the beach together, and I said to the kid who was probably 10 or 11, I said, "Did you see the tuna in the pocket?" He goes, "I did." I mean, we had giant bluefin tuna busting right in front of us as well.
Yeah.
So there is bait. There's plenty of bait, but again, it's just bizarre to me that those stripers feed so heavily between Barnegat Light, the Island Beach area, all the way up to Sandy Hook, all through November. And then the first week in December, there's just they all just leave the beach. They head south. And that's when the guys in Sea Isle and Cape May and Lewis, Delaware will get into a bite, but they're not getting in on the surf. They're heading out just inside the line.
Yeah.
It's weird. Very weird.
I think for my money, that's something that has to get figured out. What has happened to them? Where are they going? I mean, I look at it, you can't have this many. Okay, let me qualify this. With social media, with everyone taking pictures of fish now, it is entirely likely that there were always a lot of 50-inch plus, I'm not saying 50-pound, 50-inch plus fish being caught in history. And we just didn't know about it because people weren't sharing the information. For my money, fishermen today, while they do have the platforms to share things, generally speaking, always shared information. They were always talking about it. Like you knew, like I knew when there was the redfish bite in Hereford Inlet. It was a secret thing, but I knew, and I was just a kid when it, back when that happened, because people talk and they want to help each other out. And with that said, I think that it's not just increased exposure of these larger fish being caught. I think there are more larger fish. There actually are. It's not just that they're being caught and we just publicize them more. So, but where are they going? Like we can guess that they just keep going straight south. We can guess that, but somebody can research that. And to me, that seems really critical that they change the locations or, keep doing what you're doing. but add something in, give a little bit more funding to something that's important like that, because that'll tell us all we need to know about wind. If they're going to be right in the middle of migration paths now for these fish that they're doing so much to try to protect,
Mm-hmm.
and that, if you find out now it's going to go right through the wind leases, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they need to reconsider this entire thing.
Well, I think you bring up a good point too, because if climate change is such a funny topic, because it leads to it triggers people, right? And years ago, I was sitting in on conferences, and I was sitting in a Sea Grant meeting, and somebody was using global warming. And I suggested to the scientist, I said, can we not use global warming? Can you say climate change? He got really mad at me. He goes, what's wrong with global warming? I was like, well, because it's climate change, and global warming triggers people. So let's go with climate change. But now climate change is a trigger.
Yeah.
But we all recognize that the ocean waters are warming, whether it's natural and cyclical or whatever. It's just true right now. So when a government employee, a bureaucrat tells me Jim, you've got to be listening to the argument about climate change. I was like, I listened to it. I've seen it. I've seen warming waters. I see migratory differences. So what are you doing, Mr. Bureaucrat, to figure out where these stripers are going during the winter? Because I don't think, and I know that they're not off the Outer Banks. So the Albemarle, they used to travel up Albemarle Sound, and there used to be a recruitment. They used to have striped bass there, and the stripers used to 20 years ago be swimming with the giants off the Outer Banks. They're not there anymore. So if we believe that climate change or warming waters has pushed the stripers farther to the north, then I challenge the scientific community to figure out where these stripers are sitting during the winter months, because I think a lot of them are directly off of our coast, in the New York Bight. And they're certainly off Delmarva. They're certainly 25, 30 miles off of Ocean City. We know the stripers are there. The scientific community will accept that. But I think that gets back to your point, is that we seem to get this directive and people wag their fingers at us. But I'll wag them back and say, well, what are you doing to figure out where these fish are and where they're going? Well, it's shoulder shrug. And then I still hear the same thing. Well, in the winter, the fish go down off the Outer Banks. Shut up. They don't go down the Outer Banks. They're not at the Outer Banks. They're going down as far as the Chesapeake Bay, and that's it. They're not off the Outer Banks. So don't tell me that anymore.
It's amazing, though. The people will jump on, this has changed, say global warming or climate change. It's changing. It's changing. It's changing. Okay, well, where are they? Well, they go here. What, you don't think that changed?
Correct. Absolutely. That's the thing.
Changed.
Yeah, everything else is changing, but they're still going back to their textbook to say, oh, no, this is what we have. I was like, you just told me things have changed, and you haven't changed your directive. You haven't changed your textbook. How is this?
Right.
And then it goes back to the beginning of the conversation, Rich. I'm sitting in the middle going, you're telling me I'm an idiot. You're telling me I'm an idiot. I'm sitting there in the middle going, you're both idiots, because neither one of you will listen to the other one.
Right.
If you're going to tell me that the migratory changes are there, well, then figure it out, because we need to know this information. And certainly when it comes to industrial offshore wind, you need to have better data to know how you're going to impact this. Here's the biggest problem that I have with industrial offshore wind and huge scam that it is that they have pushed these industrial offshore wind sites off 20 miles, 30 miles, whatever it might be. Well, in order to bring that power ashore, you've got to convert. You've got to do the AC-DC conversion, right?
Yes.
So the one thing they've not told anybody, it's not just the turbines, but it's these enormous substations. And these ginormous substations are going to have to cool themselves as they do the AC-DC transition, transforming the electricity to bring it ashore. They're going to suck in cool ocean water and all the larvae that swim there. It's going to cool the generating system, and then they're going to spit out hot water. It's no different than the onshore nuclear power plants that didn't have the closed cycle cooling, right? And when this hot water goes back into the ocean, it's going to be treated with chemicals. BOEM has acknowledged this. So I'm like, all this stuff that they talk about, the ocean water warming and everything, and we've got to do this, they're going to pull wind out of the air, convert it to energy. We're not going to have as much ocean wind anymore to cool things. So things are going to get naturally hotter. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be, right? You're going to convert this wind into something else. We're not going to have ocean breezes. And then you're going to pump hot water laden with chlorine and other chemicals back into the ecosystem. And you're going to take all that larva up and you're going to destroy the larva. So now we're not going to have baby X, insert fish species name here.
So I did not know that.
Nobody knows it because they haven't been honest with anybody. No government official has been honest with the public. And I sit here and I ask these questions, and then some wind proponent or somebody's getting paid, or they think, and God bless you if you think we're going to get more fish around the structure. Yeah, in some species, but there are all these other things that nobody's asking. And when I bring it up in a meeting, they take me off into the Zoom breakout meeting and say, Jim, I can't say it publicly, but you're absolutely right. But
so what we need is more people. So you're not the only one, or you and the few others that I've seen, raising these questions.
We need more whistleblowers in government is what we need.
We do. But I don't know. Society has turned towards money rather than ethics. And here's one thing I've always appreciated about you. You're very, very consistent in the way that you approach things. There was a
my wife would call that stubbornness.
Well, I think in this case, it's a good stubbornness, and I'm going to call it consistency, because you're constantly on the big topics or topics, about certain species. People say, what was it? The debate a few years ago, should we regulate sheep's head in New Jersey? And your answer was, be careful. Why would you regulate it if you haven't studied it? You have to study it first, and then you take your actions, right? And that's essentially what you're saying right now. We're just not studying it, and we're not releasing information, so nobody really knows what's going on. That's how sheep's head was a few years ago. Nobody knew anything about them except that some people were catching. I
will tell you this. So sheep's head has gotten to the point, because a lot of folks, you and so many of my friends have been bringing it up. And I temper that with what I have told you. It's like, be careful. But the state is looking at that. They have the New Jersey Marine Fisheries Council has put their advisors on this. The state of New Jersey, the Bureau of Marine Fisheries, is looking at it. So they are processing this information.
But that's the victory, because so you changed my mind. I was thinking, you may as well. And you're like, well, and then the more that I thought about that over the months after that, I was like, damn it, Jim's right. We shouldn't just be slapping a regulation on something just because we're not sure. Let's study it and figure it out.
Talk about it. Let's get some input from the community. Right. Stakeholder input is something that really should mean something. Government says stakeholder input all the time. They talk about, we in the recreational fishing community, commercial as well, we're called the regulated community. So you talk to any federal bureaucrat, you say, oh, you're part of the regulated community. I was like, well, that makes me feel real happy. But we're stakeholders. Right? Commercial, recreational, surf caster, or kayak guy, whatever it might be. The state of New Jersey does a pretty darn good job of listening to their stakeholders, and that's us. I go to Marine Fisheries Council meetings all the time. I'm often the only person there. There's actually one guy from the Fish Hawks of Forked River who's at every meeting. It's great. I can't remember his name right now, but they are listening. And when you push something, you might not get an immediate response. You might be pushing them to say, I want you to go with lever A. They might not pull lever A, but they're going to look at all the levers, and all of a sudden they say, maybe we should look at all these things. Right. So yeah, you're right. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. It might not get a new wheel, but it certainly gets somebody looking at where we're going to put the grease and whether or not we do need a new wheel. And that's part of the process. And like it or not, that's the political process.
Well, and that's the thing. There's no instant gratification in any of this, because we're talking about government, right? And regulations. You're not going to just show up and march around and have your signs and have something happen the next day. It's just not going to happen.
Instant gratification in government is gone. It was gone 250 years ago with tar and feathering. I'd like to bring it back, but they every time I've written a bill and sent it to a friend of mine, even with molasses, they won't do it.
Yeah,
but I think it'd be great.
But it is good to hear that my limited experience with the New Jersey groups is they do listen. And, just think about a couple of years ago, in my opinion, we didn't get the fluke regulations that we wanted, but they listened and they did extend the season, which they didn't, I don't think they wanted to do, but they listened to everybody in all of those meetings. And while they did put that crazy slot in there, I mean, I understand why the slot was there. I understand the biology behind it, but they did listen.
Well,
And that to me was encouraging that they did actually listen to the people that were talking.
the slot is still on the table. That's something we should probably still look at in the future. Folks know that my friends let's call them my friends in management, state management, they know that I fish predominantly in the back bay for fluke.
Yeah.
So when they check on me over the weekend, they'll ask me how'd you do. So this happened to me on was it Saturday morning? I went out and I had a 22 incher and I had an 18 incher right on the nose. A friend said, "Nice fish. How many throwbacks?" I said, "Probably a dozen." What size range were they? How many were in the 17 to 18 inch size? And I know what he was hinting at. Yeah. Because we really do need to look at this stuff because it is kind of important, especially for the guy who never leaves the back bay. Because whether you're in Monmouth County, which is a lot less, fewer people are fishing than Navesink, a bunch of people in Shark River, some in Manasquan, all throughout Barnegat Bay, from the upper stretches all the way down through Little Lake Harbor, Great Bay, Ludlam, all the way down. What you mentioned, the hole that you were talking about before.
Yep.
The mosquito fleet is the way Dave Scholl at Absecon Bay referred to them. The guys who have their boats on the roof, whether it's a kayak or a car topper, or they're taking their skiff down on the trailer. That early season bite is very important. Those fish are thick in the back bays until the water warms up in late June, July, and then there's no bay bite anymore.
Right.
At that point, folks are going to be lucky to get 16, 17-inch fish. So it is something that needs to be looked at because there are a lot of different varied interests. There's the guy who's chasing striped bass in North Jersey all the way until the end of June. So he's not, now he's finally starting to think about fluke fishing. Oh, the stripers are gone.
Yep.
But if you're down in Ludlam, or you're in behind Sea Isle, you think I've been on fluke all the time because I'm not chasing stripers. I'm going after fluke.
Right.
So I think the slot fish is a really important consideration to look at in the future because if we can do it right, it would make sense. And that narrow slot maybe didn't work, but I think as far as gathering data for the state, it was a nice experiment to give us some information. But
I thought it was interesting. Out of all the options, I wanted to keep the 18, the standard. My second choice was, well, then just do the slot. And then I had a terrible season because I couldn't buy a slot. I was getting all overs and I was getting so frustrated with it. But, for those that don't understand or realize what it's about, the entire reason for the slot is because you are generally speaking about a female flounder if it's over 18 inches. The males typically stop growing in the 17 range, 16 to 17. So, anyone that had basic biology courses knows that the population depends on the women, not the men. It's the number of women. You can repopulate with, one guy and a million women, but it's not going to work the other way around. It's just not going to work. And that's the way that's why they did it. And biologically it made sense, but fishing wise, I had a really rough year. I just couldn't buy a slot. But
that slot fish, I did not have my boat. I had a kayak, and you're a kayak fisherman. And measuring fish on a kayak is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So even with my tape, I was like, I can't tell if this is 16.99. This is stupid. Or was it 16.99, 17 I forget what it was.
It was 7. It was 8. It was under 18, so it couldn't touch 18.
17.99. So I couldn't figure it out, and the fish is flopping. And I'm like,
it goes back. There's nothing you can do. It's too
when
close.
I had it, I hated it. When it was gone, I loved it. So, and that's the thing about fisheries management, because now I'm at the point where, I have caught a mess. I got into a patch on Saturday. It was like, I was short drifting because I got onto this patch, and it was like every 60 seconds, I was catching another 16, 17-inch fish. Yeah. But I moved. Said, there's nothing but small fish here. I'm going to go back down to this other area. And I came back there later on. But, hey, that's fishing. So as long as we're out, I think the biggest concern in any fishery, I don't care if it's black. So stripers, we don't have a season except for the March 1st opening in the back bay. But in black sea bass and fluke and porgy and everything else under the face of on the face of the planet, it's all about seasons. And when it comes to fluke, the longer the possible season, the better we are. That's where I want to be. The longest possible season.
Now that was the favorite part that I had was that they added what 2.5 to 3 weeks onto the season, but they brought it earlier in May. And I said for years, people are like, well, the fluke bite doesn't even start to the end of May anyway. I was like, no, it only starts then because that's when you're allowed to fish for
That's exactly right. You're absolutely right.
You'll catch them in March. You'll catch them in, they're starting to move in. And that's when the big fish are there too.
And the best thing is they're up in shallow water because they're coming into the bays in March and April, and they get into shallower water where it's warmer. So it's easier fishing.
Yeah.
Rich, you just nailed it, because people have this misconception that fluke don't arrive until May. And I say, where did you come up with that? It's like, well, because that's when the season starts. It's like the fluke are arriving, especially in the South Jersey estuaries, much earlier than that. They're coming into March and April. But we are trained by the government to think of seasons. The season starts here and it ends there. That's when the fish are there. Oh, okay. So I shouldn't fish for them before then. No, don't.
Yeah, and I also, I'd rather have them add time to the beginning, because I think that's I love fishing in the colder water.
Selfishly, that's what I want too. So
yeah, but the other part is people say, well, all the fluke move out. Well, I have caught a lot of 24 plus inchers in the backwaters in August. I mean, like, you're dying from the heat in August. It's harder. It becomes a grind, but you'll still find them. There's like what I would consider the resident population, because they're not where they should be.
Where are you fishing?
But you can get
primarily. Where are you talking?
Cape May County.
Cape May County.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that, but you find a slower bite in July though.
A slower,
less opportunity with keepers. No, you're not finding that.
No. I think if I were to go back and look at my logs, I probably have my most success in early May, followed by July, probably 15th until August 31st. I mean, it just now I do have trouble after September hits.
See, now I have fished a lot. I grew up on Long Beach Island, so it was behind Long Beach Island. I kept my boat, and I have family in Great Bay, so I'm there. And now I'm the upper stretches of Barnegat Bay. So what I'm relating in that stretch is that, especially Great Bay, it tends to just kind of dry out. Little Egg Harbor behind Beach Haven, Little Egg, Great Bay seems to just the fluke move into deeper water. They could be in the deep water.
That's the thing. I'm talking when I'm fishing 35 feet plus of water.
Right. And if you can't find that in the back bay, you're going to have to go off the beach. You're going to have to go offshore.
It's really tough. Yes.
But then what I would find is in September, usually after the fluke season would end, after the summer flounder season was ending, those fish, I'm thinking a lot of those fish come back into the back bay, not all the way back but they're coming into those creeks because that's where the mullet and the peanut bunker and everything else is funneling out of those creeks.
Right.
Because that's what I would find in early October, late September, is plugging along the sod banks, not plugging, but throwing soft plastics along the sod banks down on Shooting Thoroughfare. All of a sudden, now I'm catching fluke again. I was like, where were you 4 weeks ago when I wasn't even fishing? So it's the same in the upper stretches of Barnegat Bay where I am now, and I fish a lot behind Bay Head and Manilooking Bridge and Manasquan River. And
but you also don't have that depth there, though, that I'm talking about, do you?
I have some areas where I can get 30 feet of water in the back, but they're typically dredge holes.
Okay.
For the most part, my deep water, right now I'm fishing on an edge. My best fishing has been on an edge that goes from 6 feet down to 15, 18 feet.
Yeah.
So finding the 30 feet up here is more like finding a dredge hole.
Gotcha.
The most part, which I don't know if that's what you're fishing. Patty's Hole. Where did Patty's Hole come from? Is that just a natural hole or is that a dredge hole?
No, as far as I know, it's natural. I'll put it this way. I'm 52, grew up going to Stone Harbor my entire life. That's behind Avalon. It was there when I was my first fishing trips. Yeah, and it drops down about 30, 35 feet in certain spots. I think it's just a natural cut through the marshes.
Wow.
I think you have other ones down there. I mean, I have Seacon, obviously. That's a very deep inlet. You have some deep areas back there. You have them behind Wildwood. You have a few. They're a little harder to find, but you can also back in the marshes find in the marshes the 35-foot hole. That's not a dredge thing. It's
You're
just
doing that with a kayak, though. That's
I'm
the
doing that
benefit
with
of
the
the
kayak.
kayak.
Yeah. But there are other things, you but also late in the season, or late in the season, meaning July through the end of August, you should be looking for the cooler water, which means you should be getting a lot tighter to those inlets.
All right. Can I go to the comments?
Yeah.
John Hooker. Did John Hooker just check in? Fishing will be better once the windmills are installed. They are incredible magnets for bait and predators.
I think he probably just joined.
John, we were just talking about that. One of the problems that you're not seeing is that when we catch a lot of fish around the structure, around those hundreds and hundreds of turbines, that we're going to go over our recreational harvest limit, and the federal law and the government will not give us more quota. So we're actually going to, if you look at black sea bass as an example, we're going to go over our quota, and there's no way that the government can provide us more quota.
Right. They're legally not allowed to.
Correct. And oil platforms in the Gulf, they don't have power cables running ashore. They're just pulling fossil fuel out of the ground, out of the seafloor. So you don't have to deal with EMF. You don't have to deal with substations and wastewater and AC/DC transformation. The bottom line, the sales point is you're going to have lots of fish around the structure. But the government has already acknowledged that any fish that aggregate around the structure, we have no way of giving you more fish. So once you overfish your limit, we're not going to give you more fish. And you're not taking into consideration that the oil platforms do not transmit EMF under the seafloor.
Right. And for me, the biggest thing that you said, Jim, which I never thought about, was that exchange of energy into the hot water. So now we're going to be dumping the hot water out in that area as well. And that's, I mean, maybe it's good for the winter to hold striped bass, but you can't fish for them there.
Yeah, right. Not 18 miles off or 8 miles off.
No, you can't even do anything with it. I think it's just, I don't know. I don't know that John agrees, but hey, we don't all have to agree. But John, I would say, yes, he did say that he did just join. You might want to listen to the beginning of this. There were a lot of details that we went through about that, and you might change your mind.
At the comment. I like looking at the comments. This is a cool part of the podcast. I don't get to see that when I do my weekly video. That would make my weekly video about 2 hours long, I think. I should try that one time.
Yeah, it can be pretty difficult, though, when you're trying to do this and have a conversation and read at the same time. And you see some comments in there, like my brother always throws me off when he writes his things in there.
I'm going to have to look for that.
Yeah, but I don't know, John, I think so you don't need to harvest more.
It's not about harvesting more, John. It's about harvesting less, because when you harvest more in season 1, they're going to give you fewer days to fish in season 2. Then you're going to go over your harvest limit in season 2. They're going to give you less days to fish in season 3. It's one of those. It's a dog chasing its tail, and eventually, when he catches it, you're dead. So,
right. It's like for me in real estate, it's like chasing the market down. You'll never catch it, and once you hit that cycle, you'll never catch it. You're just going to keep going, and it's going to get shorter and shorter and shorter until now there's a big problem. You'll have a great one-day season if you can make it out there on that Tuesday that it's open, right? That Tuesday in May.
Red snapper down in the Gulf of Mexico. I remember many years ago, we were warning about how the federal fisheries law was going to lead to lower seasons on red snapper. And I remember they had like a 3-day season,
Yeah. Well, that's North Carolina and flounder right now.
It's pretty much.
They had a full closure. Then I think they did a 1-week season. And then I think there was a 3-day season, and I don't know. Personally, I love fishing for flounder in North Carolina because they're huge and they're all over the
That's what I
place, but
hear.
you weren't allowed to keep any. I don't even think you could target them there.
A couple of years ago, I'm sitting in my office and I can hear my wife in the other room talking to a friend. It's November, and I can hear her talking. She goes, "No, that's not going to work. No, that weekend's not going to work. Listen, November's completely out. It's striper season for Jim." And later on, I came in and I said, "I really love you very much, but can you imagine a 3-day fluke season?" And my wife says, "We're going to Nashville for a wedding that week." No, I am not going. It's a 3-day fluke season. I'm fishing every single day. So
Yeah, and look, and we can't even say that that won't happen because we can point to states where it has happened for very similar, if not identical, reasons.
oh, look at bluefin tuna. Bluefin tuna is one that has everybody riled up right now, and we don't have enough quota. We don't have enough quota, and we have too many people participating in the fishery. Not that that's bad, but the bluefin tuna fishery got so good that more people came in.
Right.
But because more people came in, now we can't fish for as many bluefin tuna. And people
Right.
are going nuts. And it's impacting business, and it's impacting our ability to go out and enjoy bluefin because now we've got one school bluefin. And it's ridiculous because the government doesn't have the capacity to understand floor planning in your world, perhaps, or figuring out a way of saying we're going to have to embrace or have to plan for the future. And as more recreational fishermen get involved, we need to offer more quota. We have to provide more access. It's not the other one, and
Yeah.
that was the promise of fisheries management that has not come to fruition. They said, sacrifice now, you're going to get more later. 20 years later, we're asking for more, and they're calling us pigs. And that's a problem. So,
Yeah, and I don't know. There aren't very many examples that you can give where you ever get anything back.
no,
From
not.
government. I mean, think about here's a good example for people in the Philadelphia area. The Philadelphia city tax was a temporary tax enacted, I believe, in World War II. Temporary. And it is still there and it increases, even though it was set up for just during those couple of years. And because once they have it, they don't give it back. That's why, again, I'm still so excited that we got more time added to Fluke 2 years ago in a longer season, because you never see that. You never see that. And you should never expect it to happen again. I don't think.
Jersey people will know that if you're old enough to remember, the Garden State Parkway tolls were only supposed to be around until they paid for the paid for the Parkway. And now they're up to, I don't know what it is. I don't even know because it just comes out of my bank account, right?
Yeah. You have to get the Easy Pass because you don't have a change cup big enough anymore for it. You used to be able to just throw the quarter and the dime in there, right? Or the dime and the nickel.
That. I was one of the last people to come around to the Easy Pass. My wife would laugh at me. I still love throwing the money in the. Why do I love throwing my money away in a basket? I don't know, but
it was fun because you hear it ringing around and you got to hope that you don't miss one and it comes flying back out.
Plus, periodically, you would stop at the toll plaza and you'd open up your door, and most people, you'd make a couple of bucks because they missed the basket.
Yeah. You could
Did that more
make a
times
day
than
of it.
I tell you.
That's your fun for your live bait. Well, listen, Jim, we're over an hour. I told you that we'd be at an hour, so I want to stick to that. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. I just think that this is just too important. A lot of people say, well, just keep talking about fishing. And this is it. Like, if we're not talking about this kind of stuff, we're not going to be talking about fishing, down the road. And people, I think, need to, whether you agree with me or Jim, or you have your own view or whatever, I think we all benefit by talking about it and
I agree.
sharing information and getting an open dialogue, because I just see big problems coming. And I am, as my favorite fishery being fluke, I am really concerned that it's all going to change. And it's not going to change for the better. And we're going to end up not just rerouting these different species of fish, but we're going to end up killing them. And good luck getting back from that. It could take decades if you can reverse it quick enough, decades to get fish back if you're lucky. And I don't know, man. I just think that the benefit of a few dollars into the government from these things right now without the proper research doesn't work.
No, I appreciate that. Here, Rich, I would say this. I get it. I get criticized in my The Fisherman magazine, it's a whole magazine full of how to and where to information for New Jersey, Delaware Bay. But I tend to go into politics a lot, and everybody knows that I'm kind of a political junkie. You don't have to read the column, but the way I see it, I started in journalism before I came to the Fisherman, and I don't see a lot of folks who have the opportunity to write about this stuff and cover the management meetings. I have a good friend of mine, Danny Raydell, who's at the Asbury Park Press. Great writer. He's totally in tune to fisheries at the Asbury Park Press, but he's also involved in covering a lot of other meetings and other information. We don't have a lot of people in my field going to meetings and breaking this down. My competition doesn't do it. The writers that I learned from, they're not around anymore. So right. The fact is, I try to break all this information down the best I can, present both sides, because, and this is not being arrogant, it's just the nature of the media at this point. There's nobody else doing it right now. People just aren't doing it. So I'm going to continue to do it. And I enjoy talking about this. I'm glad people have enjoyed it. And you can always hit me up at the magazine. I will tell you this. This week, I'm busy working on the July edition, which will come out in 2 weeks. So the Fisherman magazine, when it comes out, I've got a sheep's head on the cover, sheep's head story, which I think is great, by Captain Quawin. But I've got a big story on the Recreational Reform Initiative and sector separation, which is another big topic. If you feel like you want to talk about that in a couple of months, I'm happy to do that. But this is a big thing that people need to pay attention to, because it really does have an impact on the way we're going to fish in the future for fluke, sea bass, porgy, which is more important up in North Jersey, but also bluefish. In terms of how we get our limits, our season size and bag, and how we get access to those fisheries, it does all come from government and government-appointed people, politically appointed people. Right. And I'm going to continue to break that down the best I can, because it is important for folks who want to know why are the limits the way they are. I want to try to do that. So anyway, pick up that July edition, because that's pretty deep article, but I appreciate the feedback on that.
Well, I'll definitely be reading it. I'm sure. Actually, I do know that most of the people that I at least communicate with regularly and text me and call me, email me about this show, get your magazine. As a matter of fact, for the shows, I always hear, yeah, I saw Jim Hutchinson. I signed up for a new subscription for the next 2 years, or I'm already 1 year into a 2-year subscription, but I renewed it anyway.
Oh, God bless. I appreciate that a lot. I've been doing this for 22 years, 23 years, and I don't think I could do anything else at this point. So thank you for continuing to help me do that.
Hey, it's great. And I'll tell you what, the one thing that I had said when I came back to doing this after the year off was, I'm going to do this the way that I think I should. So it's going to be about, the community part of it, and really connecting with the people, and doing the show based on feedback and requests for guests. And yours, as I had mentioned, you're one of the most commonly mentioned people to come on. And I want to support local businesses, because I think that is the backbone of fishing. And the Fisherman is a local, even though there are various Fisherman magazines in different locations, they are locally based. You focus on the region and the states. And I think that's why it kind of connects with the viewers and the listeners of this show, because we all kind of have a similar mindset in those things.
Well, it's unique. I'm glad you said that, Rich. It's still a mom and pop operation. We're not a corporation. It's owned by a husband and wife in Long Island who are very good friends of mine, and they let us do what we need to do in New Jersey. It's been going on for 50 years. They say you got to do what you got to do. Just make sure you're covering and protecting and defending the anglers and the recreational industry and recreational fishing industry in New Jersey. That's paramount to what we do. So.
Yeah. Well, I am going to reach out to you to have you come back on later. We'll go through that article in detail and any changes that come up. Seems to me like this whole striped bass thing is going to pick up again, as far as conversation later in the year.
Oh, along those lines, just real quick. Yeah, we'll I expect to hear more this summer on striped bass. Getting back to where we stand now, I was saying that I believe the spawning stock biomass is healthy and growing. young of the year. The recruitment is going to be troubling, but we shall hear more. We will hear more after the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, ASMFC, meets this summer. And you can expect some public comment periods, public comment hearings coming up in the fall. I don't know what direction they're going to go, but there will be two components to think about. One is that spawning stock biomass and rebuilding the big fish to that magic number, which I think we're healthy right now. But the other component is going to be on the back end, the baby fish that are coming out. And that's going to be the bigger concern. So there will be discussion in the fall, and public comment sessions will be held.
So maybe I'll reach out to you and we can get you on before those public comment sessions, get people aware that they're coming up and informed on where we are, what the information is at that current time so they can participate and, do their part.
Would love to, except if it's in October and November, like my wife said, I won't.
I'm thinking more like late August, early September.
Oh, we can do that. We can do that. As we're finishing up Fluke and Sheepshead, and that's fine.
Exactly. All right. Well, hey, thanks again for coming on, Jim. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. We'll be back next week. I've got a few weeks of guests lined up that I think everyone's going to like, and not all repeats from before, but some new people that people got to get to know. So, Jim, thanks again. Everyone, thank you. And until next week, everyone, get out there, get on the water, get some tight lines.